who we've got today, we've got Andy Riise. And Andy is somebody I first met about 4 years ago. And it kind of took me by surprise because, I think sometimes we can think we're the center of all things mental toughness. And then it's occasionally comes as a surprise that there are people out there who are also talking about mental toughness and thinking about it and coming up with very similar ideas. And in fact, Andy is now known as the mental toughness coach in North America. But I've had a look at his LinkedIn profile, and I think it would take half a day just to read the damn thing. So it's a challenge to give justice to all his experience and expertise. He's got things like he's been a fullback for Army football. He's a sports coach and sports psychologist. He's had an exceptional military career of almost 25 years, reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel, and at one stage he was the mental performance coach for the 75th Ranger Regiment. He's got first degree from West Point. That's impressive in its own right. And then he went and taught at West Point for a while. He's got a master's degree in exercise psychology. I'm beginning to feel a little bit inadequate here, John. And he got a thirst for knowledge that actually sort of takes in several other universities. He's been on so many courses. And I'm rather pleased he's just completing our licensed user training for our 4Cs model. And on top of all of this, as if he's not got enough in his day, he's got a volunteering list that is just exhausting to read, but includes things like he's an assistant scoutmaster. He's actually a rugby union coach, but he's somehow found time, and amongst all of this, to be the founder and operator of a new company designed to perform, whose stated mission is almost the 4Cs. It's the 3Cs, is to create, coach, and connect. So Andy's got a lot of stuff that he can share with us. I'm hoping that we can get it all in a reasonable time place. So Andy, welcome to this podcast. We're delighted to have you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you. I'm just a huge fan of your work. And obviously I'm a partner with AQR International, and just really looking forward to having a really good discussion about one of our favorite things, mental toughness.
Well, I think the starting point, Andy, has got to be, how did you get engaged with the concept? Where was your first connections with it?
Sure. So it goes back to when I was at West Point. And for those that are familiar with the U.S. Military Academy, it's like Sandhurst in the UK, or the Military Academy. That's a 47-month crucible experience that's designed to really test your mettle. And there's been a lot of interesting studies on resilience and hardiness at West Point, and for good reason. I mean, it's a pressure cooker. It's one of the hardest academic universities in the country. You get military requirements. Their mission is to help, develop young men and women to become leaders of character in the Army and for our nation. And, I look back and after teaching there, I was like, I had no business being there had it not been to be a recruited American football player. And they had a great offense. I was a fullback, which is kind of a dying breed. And so it was a great fit for me athletically. I was doing okay academically, I was doing okay militarily, but academically, I just was getting my butt kicked. And my sophomore year, which is really the most difficult year, they call it the yuck year. You're called yearlings, but they call it the yuck year for a reason. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Is that I just switched positions from offense to defense. In football, I was getting my butt kicked in the classroom. I was struggling with the regimentation, my military requirements. I'm sleep deprived. And, for the first time in my young life, I wanted to quit. And I thought I was pretty mentally tough, coming up, having been a Boy Scout and, done a lot of hard things as a young man and pushed myself athletically. And, but I was at my end of my rope, and my coach referred me to a very unique center at West Point, which is very unique to the history of our field in performance psychology, specifically as an entry point into the U.S. military back in 1989. And so I'm there in 1997. And I had this unique academic service center, which in a lot of ways wouldn't look anything different than a normal university, where they provide tutoring and academic assistance, but they use the best practices of sport and performance psychology, and they help cadets who all have to be athletes of some sort, either at the collegiate level or at the recreational level. And plus we have our physical education stuff. So helping them physically, academically, and militarily. And so I started learning about mental skills. I had no idea what it was. Started working one-on-one with an Army officer who went to the University of Virginia, studied under Bob Rotella, who's a legend in our field, especially working with golfers. And so, I learned about, how to develop confidence despite setbacks, how to be composed in extreme circumstances, how to concentrate amidst distraction, how to, what I control and not control. I mean, essentially started learning the 4 C's of mental toughness. Yeah. And ironically, he studied hardiness, which is kind of interesting later on in his PhD studies. But, I quickly found that, hey, I was in survival mode, but it made me better in all the arenas that I was playing in. And it helped me, survive and graduate. But what I didn't realize is that when I graduated, and everybody who graduates from the military academy, there's 5 military academies in the US for each of the branches of the services, you become a commissioned officer. Well, I graduated in June 2001 and became commissioned as an artillery officer. And then 9/11 happened several months later. And so a lot of life events happened. I met my wife, 9/11 happened, and then all of a sudden our country was at war. And the way, and I joined a peacetime army, and the way that we trained was not the way that we were fighting an insurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, which I would spend a lot of time in later on, but it just would pay dividends, because even though I was leading the men and women into combat, for the first time, and, I kind of realized, okay, well, there was nothing that I could train to really help replicate what I was up against and what my men were up against. Okay. But I quickly found that, hey, beside us being really physically fit and being technically and tactically competent and being, the thing that really carried the day was our mental toughness. It helped make me a better decision maker. It helped me stay composed, and in those difficult situations where there's a lot of gray areas, maybe there's some moral, ethical decisions. And I just realized when I came back that, hey, we have to start training our brain the way we train our bodies, our craft, and our character. And it just set me on this, 20-year odyssey in and out of the military, that to where my mission is now, I want to help leaders and teams get better from the inside out. And to me, that I will later find through meeting you and my good friend, Dr. Michael Gerson, about, I use a whole bunch of different models to deliver, high quality mental skills training to my clients. And there's all kinds of models. They're all flawed, let's face it, but I never found one that I could really settle on. But I was seeking one, because I've had a really good model when I went back and taught later. But then once my friend, Dr. Michael Gerson, shout out to him, tipped me off to the 4C model, I was like, this is it. And that's when I reached out to you, and here we are.
Brilliant. That was interesting that you talked about sort of a personal epiphany when you said you hit rock bottom, found your way through it, and you thought you'd survive. Do you think you'd just survived, or do you think you actually achieved more than that? Because we talk about differentiating between you can survive or you can thrive.
Yeah. So, I think it's all relative, right? Stress is a relative thing. I think if you would have took me out of that environment, and put me in a normal, 4-year university, it would have been easy, right? Because I wouldn't have had nearly the amount of external stressors and internal pressure to perform at a high level, right? But I think that level of competition and expectations forced me to improve and grow. And I think that's definitely one of my themes. I wrote a book called Deliberate Discomfort, how U.S. Special Operations Forces, dare to win by getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And my time I spent 5 years in Special Forces, and what I realized looking back was that I was growing by getting uncomfortable every single day. I was inoculated in stress every single day to my threshold raised. So I think that, my level of mental toughness in certain areas was a lot higher because I went through that difficult experience. Had I not done that, I don't think I would have nearly been as prepared for combat as I was.
Right. But I would guess, listening to you, that you did more than just survive, because to survive generally means that you didn't really want to do it, but you had to do it. Whereas thriving is, right, I've worked something out inside my head. I now know how to deal with all the rubbish stuff. I know how to prosper. When we spoke earlier today with Dean Mumm, who's was captain of the Wallabies rugby union side, and he spoke about a very similar experience. He called it post-traumatic growth.
Yes.
And he said, when you suffer a major trauma, one of the potential outcomes is you come out of it knowing you can deal with anything.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, there's a lot of body, you guys are familiar with the body research on that. For the listeners that are not, that was really, when I came back from my second deployment, I spent 15 months training the Iraqi army, and talk about being uncomfortable. I mean, it was like
Right.
being a professional cat herder, and so it was so challenging on so many different ways. And you're training, advising, assisting, or what I call combat coaching, a foreign army. You don't speak the same language, it's a different culture. And we just were failing miserably to start off. And I think that it really forced me to shift some paradigms, and I don't say fall back on my mental training. My mental training is always supported and enhanced my performance, right? And I think there's an important differential there. But when I came back from that and I saw a lot of combat, I felt like I had, for the second time, a growth experience. And it wasn't until I worked with the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Martin Seligman, Dr. Karen Rivich, who you guys are familiar with. Karen Rivich is one of the seminal authors on, obviously, on the work of resilience, which is incorporated in our model, and also Dr. Seligman, which is about learned optimism, that's incorporated into our model. But I started being exposed to this idea of post-traumatic growth, and how can you, and it started asking this question, like, how come so many veterans were coming back and they're having post-traumatic stress versus some are having post-traumatic growth? And then how can you front load mental and emotional training in ways that would make it more likely that you're going to have post-traumatic growth versus stress? And so we've been doing a lot of that in the military, and a lot of people don't think about the military being progressive when it comes to that, but it was, in a lot of ways, we were leading the way in that effort.
You're describing one of my frustrations. I think that's absolutely right. If you can assess the mental toughness or the mental sensitivity of individuals before they experience an event, you can prepare them better for it, and you can deal with them better afterwards. The trouble is, we don't do that. We don't do it enough.
Right.
I mean,
we're so reactive.
I just wonder on that point, and going back to your kind of earlier story about your journey there, Andy. When you was it, to use my Americanism, like getting your butt kicked in academics and getting your butt kicked on the football field and everything, and you had that support at the time,
right?
Where they looked at how they could develop your skills there. And it almost sounds a bit like a bit of serendipity. It's funny how things work out. Do you think the fact that you were struggling meant that you accessed that support is actually worked out well, because it set you up for things later on that maybe if you'd been getting by a little bit better, you might not have ever accessed it?
No, you're exactly right. And that's the irony about the Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point, is that it's kind of known for helping the kids who are struggling, helping the cadets who are struggling in one of those three areas that I mentioned, right? So it kind of becomes this island in the storm for you, right? Because then once you start coming in for one reason, so for me, there was multiple reasons, you start leveraging that resource and it starts to permeate in everything that you do. And I think that was the beauty of mental skills. I didn't realize that at the time, is that, okay, wait, I can practice this stuff. I'm not beholden to a gym. I can get good quality sets and reps. And I don't need a gym. I can train this even when I'm sleeping. I'm training my brain, and I can apply it to any arena in my life. I mean, that's what an amazing thing. And I really didn't. The lights truly did not come on. I won't say till I went back and taught, because then I started like, okay, because I will tell you what I found is a challenge is that. And I experienced this when I came back for the first time, and I realized, okay, we gotta train mentally. But I was like, how do we do that? And so it was interesting, to your point, it's like, okay, not everybody has that resource. They don't have a sport or performance psychologist. They don't have that resource. And that's why I'm so passionate about democratizing mental skills training and making it available to everybody, not just elite athletes. But what I found is that leaders today, just like I did back in 2003, were like, okay, I understand the mental game is really important. It's critical. It's upwards to, you poll anybody anecdotally and they're like, how much is mental versus physical in anything you do? Okay. They're going to overwhelmingly say the mental aspect of what they do is important, but they have no idea how to train their brains, let alone train their people. And I was in that boat, and it wasn't until 10 years later when I went back and I started learning the art and the science that I started to realize, okay, how do I bring this into myself? It's a very inside out process. Now, how can I, how do we train trainers, then turn around and then reinforce this set of skills within their workplace or at home?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, John, come on.
and I was going to say it's kind of a recurring theme for anyone with a sort of sport and exercise background, but just that it's so useful to go back to that, what physical conditioning training looks like. Like, we assess and we go, well, how do I do that? I identify, well, what exercises am I going to do? What intensity, what frequency, I do them. So you pick your reps and your sets and your weight and everything like that. Right. And you push on through. And if you're doing sets of 10, that or reps 7, 8, 9, 10 should be difficult. They should, you should have a bit of a strain going there.
Right.
So we know all of that. We know how to develop skills. And then it's a matter of applying it to mental skills. Like it's right. It's crazy, really, how common it is for people to go, yes, I recognize mental skills are really vital, but I don't know how to do it. And I often think, do you know what? You don't need a PhD in psychology to recognize what mental skills are important, and at least start thinking about how you can develop them. So it's it kind of tunes in with the exact kind of conversations I've had with others so well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, to your point, John, I mean, it's kind of, you look at Peter Drucker, one of the godfathers of modern management, right? And what is his principle is that what gets measured gets managed, right? And so that we're obsessed with metrics, right? And we have this squishy mental stuff, right? That, and it's okay, how do I measure that? And that's what I love about the mental, you guys' suite of assessments. I can come in and I can assess leaders, in these specific areas and develop a plan individually and collectively, in terms of where have you started from a baseline. Now, based on our interventions and things you've done on your own, how have you improved over time? Now, to my friend, Dr. Pete Jensen, he'll say, okay, well, a lot of questions say, well, okay, well, if I'm investing in this type of mental training, what's my ROI? Okay, well, show me your books then. And nobody wants to do that, but it's, I think to your point, John, it's like, it is measurable. You do have a suite of valid and reliable tools that, help us be able to show whether or not we're moving the needle or not.
You spoke about something that I think is rising in our agenda. We do most of our work in the commercial world, with businesses and organizations. We do some in education, schools and universities, and we see a common theme. At the moment, we do a lot of work with developing the mental toughness of leaders.
Right.
What we don't see a lot of yet is those leaders developing mental toughness of the people around them. And I think when we get to that point, we're going to have another epiphany moment.
I agree with that.
What are your thoughts on that area? Because what are the challenges in that area, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, one is, exactly what you're talking about is I think that leaders either, are going to apply it to themselves, but then it's a separate set of skills to teach it, right? I think it's related, it's complementary to that. And we experienced that in the military with the Master Resilience Trainer program. So we took the principles of positive psychology, and I was one of the first trainers to take these combination, and majority of it was positive psychology skills and performance psychology skills, and bring them together and teach it in a 10-day course. And then we just started using that industrial model of cranking out as many people as we could to become master resilience trainers. Well, the reality is what we found is that they were at best familiar with it, with the skills, and could apply it to themselves. But nowhere in the course did we teach these young soldiers, who are leaders in a lot of cases, how to teach it to other people. And I think that is the ultimate challenge, right? Is that, again, the inside out model is apply it to yourself, gain some personal experience. I go from education, I acquire the skill, I develop competency, I develop conscious competency to where, eventually, it becomes part of, who I am, not just what I do. But then now I have a depth of understanding of this skill set, and now I can teach it to others. But like what you're saying, John, is I would argue that, every coach in the world, talks about mental toughness, right? But they all have a different definition. And I'll argue, just being at youth sports, and I would argue this the same way in the corporate world, is that leaders speak a language that makes them predisposed to already develop it with themselves and teach to others. We as practitioners have to just be okay with the fact that, it's not going to be perfect, And so, and I spent a lot of time when I was in Major League Baseball, really encouraging coaches to reinforce this stuff, because the consultant model is limited, as you guys know. I mean, you show up, you give them, you sprinkle a little bit of mental skills on them, and then you leave and you go to the next level, the next town, the next city. There's just not people don't scale, but coaches are the reinforcement mechanism that once you leave as a consultant, they're going to make sure that this is going to be reinforced into the daily attitudes and behaviors, right? So I think you're spot on, Doug. When we can start to figure out how to train leaders to not only train themselves, but train others, you're going to see they become force multipliers, and you're going to see this really becoming in the mainstream.
Well, the breakthrough moment for me was about 2018. I mean, you have to work, in the circumstances that you're allowed to work. Most people, when they hire you, they expect you to come in and sprinkle your magic dust around, and that's what they think they're buying. But I came across one client who was very taken with the concept, but his immediate response was, show me, I will take it into the organization. You can talk to me, but you're not talking to my team or my staff. And he took it in. And for me, I just thought, wow, I was really impressed. I wasn't in the least bit offended. I thought this was so interesting. And he achieved results that as an external provider, I could never have achieved. And if I'd have walked away, it would have evaporated. But because he was there all the time,
right,
it didn't evaporate. And I think somehow we've got to get to that kind of level of engagement with, with people, with leaders, wherever you find them.
Yeah. I think that, go ahead, John.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's something that would be, I think, so common in any kind of mental skills, psychological skills training, where whether you talk about it as psychoeducation, pedagogy, or just teaching people, or coaching people the actual skills, whereby if I decide that, do you know what, here's a breathing technique, breathe in through your nose, count to this, breathe out through your mouth, count to this number, and you'll relax. I would say the chances of you actually taking that on board and doing it are slim to nil. If I take my time to explain, here's why, right? Because when I do this, it's going to trigger your parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to release more noradrenaline, which is going to slow down your heart rate, which is going to reduce your blood pressure, which is going to ease the tension in your muscles. And if I explain the why this will work, and I explain the procedure, how it will work, not just the here's what it is, then I might get by. And I still won't get 100%.
No.
But I'll get the keen ones will do it, and they'll get the results. And then the rest of the people will see the keen ones and get the results, and they'll follow later on. And I sometimes call I don't know if it's in the States, but you might have an equivalent. I call IKEA psychology. So IKEA is like, it's the big warehouse, everything's just flat packed,
right?
And anyone can go in, you pick it off the shelf, assemble it at home, and it works, whoever does it.
Sure.
And any kind of mental skills training, IKEA psychology, this idea that you just take something off the shelf and deliver it, it doesn't work.
No.
You're a skilled carpenter with these models, and it's how you're able to recognize where how you deliver it, how you frame it, how you kind of teach those skills. Ultimately, that's what makes people like yourself successful, versus sometimes people take the user training and they find it peters out and don't get so far.
Yeah,
they're the master trainers in name.
Yeah. No, you're so right, John. I mean, and I think that, I just had this conversation the other day too, and we were talking about the generational differences, right? And I'm not big on that, but I did notice, like, and obviously you remember millennials I'm on the edge of being a Gen X and a millennial, so when millennials started getting dumped on, I was like, all right, I'm not a millennial. And so, but then the millennials, and then, my kids, I have teenagers and a young daughter, and, I think what the difference was, like, maybe, Doug, I'm not going to pick on Doug, Doug's generation is like, we didn't have to know why. You just, okay, go do it. And you do it because it's the right thing to do. And you do it. But now every generation that precedes it demands that purpose, exactly what you're talking about. And I call that leader's intent. It comes from the military, which is, intent is not just intentions. It has to do with, it's really three key things. It's, what is the purpose behind what we're doing? What are the three critical tasks we need to accomplish the mission? And what are the desired outcomes? And so I use leader's intent when I'm explaining the mental skills. It's like, all right, so Andy, okay, oh great, Andy, we're gonna go breathe through our eyeballs again. Here we go. All right, what's this all about, right? Okay, well, why do we want to do this? Why is breathing, between innings, or why are you building that into your pre-pitch routine, or your pre-match routine, or before you go do a sales, meeting with a new client that you really want to land this contract? Why do you want to build that in? And then what are the three key steps that need to be done? And then at the end of it, how can you assess yourself and determine, like, whether or not this is helping you or not? And I think, so I think that simple framework would help a lot of leaders and a lot of practitioners, is to think about it. What is the intent behind the mental skill that you're putting into practice?
Yeah, the intent is such a good way of phrasing it. And for the record, I'm a millennial. I'm one of the oldest millennials. I just creep in by a few months, but yeah, and I do like avocado on toast. So
you're a proud snowflake, and I told people I was always a fierce defender, because they were the people that I was leading for my entire career. And I said something about millennials. I said, you know what? I joined a peacetime army, and I chose to stay in a wartime army. These people signed up knowing what they're getting into. I said, but you can rip on them all day you want, but these are the people who are now leading the workforce. And it's not good or bad, that they want to know why, and that they're asking what's in it for me, and they're concerned about burnout and things like that too. And they're deciding they have a choice, and they don't want to rise and grind like the baby boomer generation did. They don't want to have to. Loyalty looks different, so we either fight that or we accept it, and then we work with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about then. I suppose a two-part question I'd ask of you, Andy, because I mean I am certain I would be absolutely useless in a military setting, but I suppose my first sort of vague question would be, what does mental toughness look like in a military setting? Yeah. And then added on to that, how does that then translate into work and sport and other areas of society?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm such a big fan of what I call the integrated and interdisciplinary applied approach to mental skills training. And let me break that down, what that means. So what I mean by interdisciplinary, is not just multidisciplinary, where you think about multidisciplinary is the rings touch on each other, but they don't really overlap. So what I mean by that, let's take the human dimension. And whenever we look at training, which is practice in the military, you basically spend all your time at your home station starting to train skills like having to do with shooting, moving, and communicating. Those three things as examples. So when I'm going to shoot and I'm going to the range, there's a physical aspect of that, right? So there's physical training. Okay, well, how do I incorporate the mental aspect of training into the time I have dedicated for physical training, which is 60 to 90 minutes every single day, versus making it something I have to go PowerPoint deep in a classroom, which does not work, right? Education is important. We're all about it, but how can you educate like in the environment where the user or the soldier or the athlete is? So that's number one, is that integrating that way too. And then and it's an interdisciplinary in nature to where you're getting a multiplicative effect because you're incorporating multiple skills together. And so when I can apply mentals, the way I say is, if you can take as quick as you can take the intangible aspects of when you're doing a task, and the quicker you can make them tangible, whatever that is, by them practicing and experiencing it, the more likely it is to stick. And we know that the research supports this as well too. And so I think that's huge as well too. And I think that, so for example, if I'm on the range and I'm learning about imagery and I'm learning about self-talk and I'm using, my breathing and regulation techniques, I'm tapping into my value system, and I'm doing that while I'm in the process of, qualifying on my individually assigned weapon or whatever it is. Or you think about even complex operations that I participated in the special forces community, to where, you've got multiple moving parts on a larger scale. You're coming in the middle of the night, you're dropping in on a helicopter with just your night vision goggles. And then, my job was to be able to talk to the aircraft. I'm down with the Green Berets, I'm talking to the aircraft. I have to shoot, move, and communicate. And meanwhile, I'm like an air traffic controller managing, up to 6 aircraft at different levels. And I have to develop a mental model to where they are to and based on what the ground force commander is telling me, I've got to be able to put those bombs on target. So you go from basic, and then you add complexity, in terms of how you apply mental skills and a scaffolding effect. I think that's super important as well. And then I think the other piece too is then you go back and you then assess it. So to break this down, I think there's a 4-phase approach to applying in a time and place for all mental skills. Because let's face it, like the novice practitioner will throw a bunch of mental skills on an athlete, and then it gets them thinking more than they should be thinking, when they need to just get out of their own way. So the object is to get them to think less. So timing matters. So I say in the military, it's a 4-phase approach. It's you're planning, you're preparing, you're executing, and then you're assessing. And that looks like more of a circle. In sports, that may look like, or in business, it may look like there's the before, the right before, the during, and the after. And if I'm developing my mental performance game plan, I'm incorporating that at every phase of that, around the centering around what the performance context is. So everything radiates from there. So kind of going back to the training model, okay, I just got back from the range, and I do what's called a personal after action review, where I'm reflecting back on what I just did, and then I'm developing, I'm using a mental construct to do this, to look at what did I do well, what did I not do well, what was supposed to happen, what actually did happen, what mental skills did I use in these certain situations, how do they work, do they help me or hurt me, how could I, and then I take that information, now I can use it to then move forward in the planning side to say, like, okay, well, I tried using these mental skills in these areas to couple my technical and tactical skills or my physical exertion in this certain area too. How can I then tweak some things to make them work for me as I move into the planning phase? So I'm a huge fan of that 4-phase model. I think it's applicable, in anything that you do, but it's got to be interdisciplinary. It's got to be integrated into your training, and it's got to be applied. It's got to be where you're meeting with the people where they are, and get it out of the classroom as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great, Andy, and I think people will be able to take a lot away from that, because essentially what we're saying there is, rather than trying to divide what we do by discipline, let's divide what we do by phase.
That's right.
And all the disciplines are integrated in those phases. And that I really like that the phrase you used in the military one. We say a lot in sport, executing, like the execution phase.
Right.
And it is that sense of, you mentioned Bob Rotella earlier, get out your own way. And what's really interesting then, from the phased approach that you describe, is the value of all the work in the planning and the preparation phases means that when it comes to the execution phase, the doing, you don't have to think. That's right. Because you're allowed to allow those skills, those really overtrained, really well-rehearsed skills, to come out. And then that's when we see flow states, right? That's what it is.
Right.
That's what a flow state is. Doing something you know you're really good at, pretty much without conscious effort. And you can't do something really well without conscious effort unless you've put so much work into that phase. And the amount of times people get so hung up on the execution part, because that's your goal. And sometimes that's where goal setting, I think, in many ways, goal setting can get a little bit lost. But goal setting is so often about, I want to be able to do this in that execution, that performance phase.
Right.
And that's what we start targeting. Whereas I think what I'm getting from you there is, look, what we should be targeting is the other three phases.
Yes.
And that bit will look after itself.